All right, hello and welcome. So in this video, we are going to kind of quickly discuss the communications model in the MonkeyDo. So by communications model, what do I mean? So we're going to start, our demo uses the Freedom K64F, and it has kind of built in this Ethernet port. So that's going to be our primary means of communication via the web or to the cloud. So one thing about Ethernet, though, is it's a little bit, I'm not going to say meaningless, but by just saying Ethernet doesn't mean a whole lot, because Ethernet is a physical layer protocol. There's other things that stack on top of it to make an application. So we're going to talk about the model of communication we use over Ethernet, because it can get fairly complex. So the other part we also have is our, Freedom-Auto board. So it's right there. So this, plugs into the K64F, and it brings out some solid-state relays. Now, there's also a slot on the Freedom-Auto right here for a Wi-Fi module, and you can do everything you want to do here on Wi-Fi, but for now we're going to use the wired interface over Ethernet. It does simplify a few things, but it should be fairly easy to port your code, because there is some embed software that makes it pretty easy. So in our demo, we're going to kind of combine the Ethernet, our web interface, with the solid-state relay and a temperature sensor on the board to make something cool. So the first thing we want to do is, let's bring up our next slide here, is that we have kind of like a little picture of your average smartphone, your iDevice, your Android device, and we want to kind of demonstrate the concept of like an Internet of Things application. Now, this can go about 100 different ways of how you want to enable this. So in the demo for this project, what we want to try to do is somehow get data from this temperature sensor, over to some sort of other interconnected device. Now, this doesn't have to be a smartphone, it could be a laptop, but we all, most of us have smartphones or something to get on the web. And so we want to do that. And likewise, we want the ability to kind of go the other way. We want to control this big solid-state relay. Now, there's lots of concerns about security and access control, but for now, we just want to be able to control the device and figure out, well, how do we do that? Because there's a lot of different ways, and it's easy to get bogged down in some of the details of the protocols and how you develop phone applications. So we're going to look at one possible way of doing this. So let me bring in the next slide. So we have our happy cloud here. So this is our typical internet cloud. So the K64F can have a connection to the cloud, and so can, the smartphone device. But we still got to think, how do we link those two up? So there are many ways to do it. So you might want to do something like make a web page or something else, or like a custom application on your device. But oftentimes you have to really think about how are they actually going to communicate, because there are a lot of different ways. So one of the underlying protocols in the web is that of what's called TCP. So TCP is layered on top of IP, which IP uses, Ethernet. Now, in the case of like a wireless, it's a Wi-Fi. But then TCP is used for other things such as, web server, which is HTTP. TCP is also used for file transfer protocol, so on and so forth. But when things like HTTP and FTP were developed, the idea is that through some network, and let me get up a brand new slide here. There we go. Um, the way, for example, a web server would work is some device would go into the cloud to make a request from a server, and then the data would kind of come back. And so in the case of a smartphone, it would have to go up to the cloud, and then on this cloud, maybe a web server. Now, we could certainly implement a web server within the K64F here, and then feed the data back. Now, FTP works the same way. You make a file connection, you go to a server, you grab a file. The problem is that for a lot of applications now, we're not simply just going to connect to a server to get a file and be done. We want kind of this, continuous stream of data between the two, where, for example, the K64F, could send, temperature back to the phone. And the phone could also send control signals over to here and go both ways. And we want this concept of a persistent connection. The other kind of thing about that is it would be nice to be a way to do that so it's common, in that we don't have to write, for example, an iPhone app and then an Android app and a Windows app to have a somewhat cross-platform. So the MonkeyDo software tries to kind of do all of that at once to kind of give you a way of doing that with something called a WebSocket. All right. Now, WebSocket, that's a new thing. So WebSockets are part of, and I'll write it up here, the HTML5 standard. And they were specifically created such that you could open a connection to some other device and maintain that connection, have bidirectional communication. And what's important about that is that HTML5, and HTML kind of defines what we call the document object model. Everything on a web page, for example, your icons, your images, your text. But then behind that web page, you get something on the client side that can run called JavaScript. And JavaScript is used everywhere. In automating things on the client side, meaning when you download your HTML page from a server, it has some JavaScript. You can make certain animations, menus and whatnot. And now the neat thing with JavaScript in HTML5, we have things like what's called the canvas control. And it's been the first kind of standardized way, of drawing graphics to the screen. And so we don't need, with, say, for example, Canvas, something custom like Flash or, Adobe Flash or Shockwave. And that's really powerful that you can embed all that in just kind of an HTML5 page. And then we can go one step further. These pages, in addition to having WebSockets for communication, we can have Canvas for nice graphics. There are things that allow 3D. And so the 3D capability, for example, is provided by something called a new thing called WebGL. So within your browser, we can make some really neat stuff. And because it runs in the browser, there's some other neat advantages of that, in that it can somewhat be cross-platform because all the mobile devices and your PC has a browser, and it's very portable. Now, this is not the only way to do it. You can make custom applications, and you can even make custom apps, say an iPhone app, to do WebSocket. There's nothing stopping you. But for here, we're going to use HTML5 JavaScript in the canvas control. So if you just search HTML5 canvas web GL, you'll find more than you want to know about all this. And the nice part is playing with JavaScript and HTML5 is very easy. It doesn't really require any hardware. You can do it all on your computer. So that's how it's going to kind of. So at the center of it, we're going to use a WebSocket. So in the WebSocket, so I got a new page up here. I kind of replaced the cloud. We kind of know it's there. So the way the MonkeyDo software works in its model is that we have something in the middle called a WebSocket server that sits out in the cloud. Now, what's kind of nice is that the embed platform, they give us a nice WebSocket server, and it's powered by something called, Tornado. And actually, I can bring it in here for you. So you see we come to the embed.org cookbook WebSocket server. They have a whole tutorial on how to set the server up. Now, the good news is you don't have to. Is that if we go to sockets.embed.org, if you have your own username on the embed community, you get your own channel. So they already have this set up, and it's pretty slick. And so there's also that sockets.embed.org, and they also have kind of an introduction to WebSockets. So you can find this page here. You can find this guy's page, Sam's page, on the introduction of WebSockets to learn more. But it's pretty easy. The way WebSocket works, it actually uses HTTP. And what happens is a WebSocket, it almost all takes place over special HTTP, where a client goes to a server and requests a server protocol upgrade. And then from there, you've got this kind of persistent connection. So here's the way it all works. So let me close that. Is that you have a WebSocket server sitting up in the cloud. What happens is that, let's say this node here sends a message. And I'm going to draw it in red. Well, the WebSocket server, once this guy connects to the WebSocket, if he sends a message, he will then repeat it back down to any other devices connected. All right? So in this case, I have two devices. I have my K64, our stack here, and a cell phone. But you could have more. You could have, like a PC sitting here. In that same, the red message would get repeated. Now, let me switch a color. If, say, once this cell phone is connected to the WebSocket, let's say he sends a message. He sends him to the WebSocket server. The Tornado server repeats that message back down to all the clients, and he actually repeats it. You always get your own message with this protocol. And so we can do this one last time. And let's say you had a third client hooked up simultaneously. If he sends a message, comes back to him, but the WebSocket server will repeat him down. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. And that's how it kind of works. So the nice part is you have this server out in the cloud, is that you don't need a direct connection from, say, this device to this device. You kind of connect through this intermediary, but it repeats it to everyone else. So all these guys can have simultaneous connections and kind of have their own little private thing going on. So that's kind of the model we use, where we have kind of like a command system where temperature data can come out of, for example, the Freedom Board stack and get sent to the WebSocket server. And let me just draw it up here. And then the WebSocket server will send it down to anyone else who is connected, and they can pick it up. And then vice versa. The phone can send stuff back through the WebSocket server to the device on the other end. And it's a very, very simple way. When you actually see the code, it's very straightforward. So as a quick demonstration of how this works, I have my my EMH203 channel set up. Now what I'm going to do is I can come here. I'm going to plug my board in. You can't see it, but I'm going to plug it in. And we're going to go View. Now in just 1 second. Okay, you see this message coming in here? What that means is my embedded board, after it booted up, connect to the WebSocket, and it's sending its temperature. It's 25 degrees C about in my office here. And so all he's doing is broadcasting. So what I'm going to do is clear him. Now I'm just going to disconnect him. Boop. So what I did is I unplugged his Ethernet jack. Now the other thing we can do here is I have the same WebSocket. You can also send messages through this interface. So I'm going to go hello test WebSocket. Now I'm going to click send. And if I come back to my channel viewer, notice how it sent those in here. So I could open up another window. And we'll go, this is another window. Let me go send that, and I'll go. And so that other window, so connected. So in each one of these pages, there's JavaScript code that's connecting to my WebSocket and sending data. So that's kind of neat. Now here's where we take it. I can write my own web page. Now this is a very simplistic web page, but I can send, for example, just junk data up to the WebSocket server. And look at this, I'm sending it. So if I come over here, you notice this is going through the WebSocket server. This page is just running JavaScript local on my machine. This page is also connecting to that same WebSocket server and displaying the messages. Now for MonkeyDo, I made this kind of sensor simulator. But kind of the other piece was we also made our own receiver. So think of this as the identical kind of function as the viewer given on the embed WebSocket server. But it's just our own. Think of every one of the tabs I'm clicking on has its own. So watch this. If I say this is another window and I click that. Oop, I might have to... Actually, I think I filter that data out so I can't see it. But you can see, oh, there it is. When I click it, I can see that message come through. Now, because we're using HTML5, there's all kinds of neat JavaScript libraries out there. In this case, the temperature data, and I just plot it. Now, what I can do is I'm going to get rid of my simulator. He's off the WebSocket connection. You see it stops. So just give me a second here. I'm going to plug in my actual board. Okay, there we are. And in just a few seconds after so my board DHCP'd, connected to the web, and now it's transmitting real temperature data. So isn't that cool? We can see it. So WebSockets gives a really nice way to kind of send data around by having this kind of centralized server. So that is the communications model. Now, lastly, if this is all very new to you, you may have never had a whole lot of experience in embedded networking, and that's okay. So what I wanted to do is give you some self-study kind of terminology I want you to look up and do some study on. And I think if you get a handle of what this stuff is, it'll kind of get you started. So the first thing to look up is what's called an Ethernet packet. So an Ethernet packet is just the lowest level packet. For example, when you have the RJ45 on your board. So an Ethernet packet is the raw data that gets sent around on a wire. All right. So then after you kind of study that, I want you to learn what a MAC address is. So all Ethernet packets have to come from an address and go to an address. That is the physical address of the network interface. Well, that's through what's called layer 2 in the OSI model. But the next layer, where we have what's called TCP/IP, this is what really powers like the internet, is that we have the concept of an IP address. An IP address represents an address of some node on the internet. Now, an IP address is buried in an IP packet, which is buried in an Ethernet packet. Now, all Ethernet packets have its own MAC address. So we have two kind of addresses. An IP address for something on the network, but the MAC address is of your physical card. Now, the next thing you kind of learn about is something called ARP. Well, whenever something on a network has to talk, and you want to get to an IP address. This is what we talk to whenever we talk to sockets or whatnot. We have an IP address. Well, to do that, we need to know a MAC address as well. So there's something called ARP, and this is what maintains a table between, your MAC address and your IP address. Well, then you kind of get into think, well, where does the IP address come from? So I want you to go and take some time and study something called DHCP. So that's another protocol within the TCP/IP realm. Well, once you have an IP address, then you can send data. Well, how do you send data? Well, there's two very popular ways of doing it. How you send packets in a structured manner. One's called UDP, User Datagram Protocol. And another way is called TCP. Now, there are some big differences between these and how they work, but I want you to study that. So these here's some basic, now there's a lot beside this. Don't think this is all there is, but this is some very fundamental stuff that you should know about for any application. And the reason is that everything else is built on top of this, and you kind of need to know. So for example, when you're going to look at the firmware, you're going to see lines of code that initialize DHCP in the software stack, and then report an IP address. All right, so that's, for example, something very common. Now, the last couple things I want you to look up, because I may have used the terms, you don't know what it is, so now's the time. So do some research, and Wikipedia and Google your friend is, once you have those low layer, look at HTTP. That's what powers the web. That is the web. That's for web pages. There's FTP, File Transfer Protocol. For embedded networking stuff, Telnet is beautiful. We've talked about WebSockets. Another one, for example, is SMTP for email. So now there's much more outside of this, but these are some things, some terminology I want you to do some study on to learn, to kind of understand the Internet of Things and some of the things that go on in the Internet. So I hope this video is helpful, giving you some more background. Please watch all the videos related to the MonkeyDo, so you kind of get a complete understanding of the whole system. So when you go to build it and put it together, it'll be much easier. Thanks for watching.